The second week of testimony has begun in the George Zimmerman trial. Zimmerman has been charged with second-degree murder in the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in February 2012, a shooting he claims was in self-defense. Joining us from Sanford, Florida right now is on-the-record host Greta Van Susteren, who was in the courtroom for all of today's dramatic testimony. Greta, there's no one better to have inside that courtroom to see and hear all the drama than you. Can you give us a sense of what went down from your perspective?
You know, Eric, it was absolutely fascinating. You know, being inside the courtroom, you know, I've watched on television, but when you're actually inside and you get to see the players, I mean, it's fascinating to see the prosecutors, fascinating to see the defense lawyers, but then there's the defendant, the one who's in such deep trouble and who could end up going to prison for a long time. And then if you swing your eyes over to the other side of the courtroom, in the courtroom you see the family of Trayvon Martin, obviously grief-stricken. They're there to find out, you know, what happened. And you know, it's terrible because both sides, you know, there's naturally a built-in hostility towards from the defense and the prosecution. And then you have the jury, and the jury is only 6 people here in Florida, unlike most jurors where there are about 12. The judge takes the bench, and the judge is a woman judge, no nonsense. She won't even let the people in the media have a keyboard with their iPads because she may hear it, so she's very strict. She takes the bench and the day begins. And the first witness, a voice expert. Now, this is an expert who works for the FBI, and the whole purpose is because there are, when 911 calls were made, in the background you could hear people yelling for help. And the question, who was that? Was that George Zimmerman, as he says, or was that the decedent, Trayvon Martin, who is not here to say that he did it? Now, George Zimmerman says he's the one, and that he's the one who's calling for help. And why that's so important is the question of who really is the aggressor in this brawl. So today, this expert, FBI, called by the prosecution, and he gets on the witness stand and he says that he can do some testing, scientific testing, to determine voice analysis, but not in this instance because they don't have enough clean time to do that voice analysis. So the expert can't say that it was George Zimmerman, can't say that it was Trayvon Martin. So what he does say, though, the first good thing to happen to the prosecution, I think in days, is he says the one person or 2 people who can tell, who can give you an opinion about whether it's likely it's Trayvon Martin, is his family, is his mother. So we expect to hear from her soon. We expect to hear that she will say that that is her voice. Now, there's been some discrepancy. His father was asked about it very early on, not in the courtroom, and apparently he said that he couldn't make an identification. So expect that that's going to be quite a cross-examination. But imagine having to be the defense lawyer to cross-examine the mother of the decedent. Well, that was the high point for the prosecution today, because after that, I got to tell you, it seemed downhill from there. They called a policewoman who said that on the night of February 26th that she went to the police station, and George Zimmerman was brought to the police station, and she sat down with George Zimmerman and she took a statement from him. Now, this is before he had a lawyer, right after the incident happened, and I think you have 30 seconds of tape, Eric. You might want to toss to audio. We can hear exactly. You don't have to have me tell you what happened. Let's listen to the audio, the 30 seconds. Listen, this is what George Zimmerman said within about an hour before he had a lawyer to tell you what happened.
I was walking back through to where my car was, and he jumped out from the bushes, and he said, "What the is the problem, homie?" And I got my cell phone out to call 911 this time. And I say, "Hey man, I don't have a problem." And he goes, "No, now you have a problem." And he punched me in the nose. At that point, I fell down. I tried to defend myself. He just started punching me in the face, and I started screaming for help.
All right, so Greta, we all have a bunch of questions for you, but can you react to that, watching George Zimmerman as he listened to that testimony of his own, basically, but here he is right in front of Trayvon Martin's parents. Go ahead.
Well, just think about, well, he has back to Trayvon Martin, but just think about this. This is really bingo, and Kimberly will tell you herself, it's bingo for the defense, because here is George Zimmerman getting his story about what happened before the jury. That is a good story to him, and he doesn't have to take the stand to get cross-examined by someone like Kimberly, like a prosecutor. So this is unbelievably good news for the defense, but this was played by the prosecution. And I should add that they then went on a little longer in the testimony. They had another officer named Chris Serino, who about 4 hours later did another audio interview with George Zimmerman. Frankly, it was a terrible interview. He was coaching him what to say. It was a little bit strange. But then the next day, on February 27th, the same Chris Serino takes George Zimmerman back to the scene, where we were last night, by the way, back to the scene, and walks him through what George Zimmerman says happened. And not only that, he's got a big bandage on his head. So there he is with a bandage on his head. The jury sees that. It's 24 hours later. He still doesn't have a lawyer. He's still telling his side of the story, and he never has to be cross-examined. Right, Kimberly?
Yeah, let's get Kimberly in here. Kimberly, it sounds like all these prosecution witnesses are falling on the side of the defense. I mean, does the defense even need to put a case up at this point?
Well, as Greta said, it's fortuitous for the defense, right? They don't have to expose their client to cross-examination. You had a number of witnesses that were very strong for the defense. You have the defendant not having to take the stand, getting in multiple consistent statements, and then with the female officer that Greta mentioned, they talked about religion and how surprised he seemed to be and upset that Trayvon Martin was deceased, and he talked about God and under the Catholic faith that it's not okay to kill somebody, that he was very concerned about it. So how is that going to show some kind of implied malice for a second-degree murder when you have someone so concerned about the decedent, surprised that he's even dead, upset, and asking about that, talking about essentially the sanctity of life? That, to me, was very helpful to the defense as well. I mean, if I had to, blink, rub my eyes, I would think that they were in the defense case. The prosecution already rested.
Well, that's interesting you say that, Kimberly, because the media sort of we sit in one section of the courtroom and there's a little bit of mumbling, and this is has the prosecution team joined the defense team?
Right.
That's sort of the cynicism. But remember, we're only in the second week.
Right.
A lot more could happen, and the jury may be seen as a lot differently than I do, and they get to make the call on this. They get to render the verdict.
Greta, I actually, this is Bob. I read 17 pages of this stuff, and by the end of it, I couldn't decide who was on the aggressor on top, who was on the bottom, who was making the call, who wasn't. But one thing strikes me. It still baffles me that he was told to not pursue this kid. In no uncertain terms, we do not need you to do that. Now, it seems to me that if that's the case, and he pursued anyway, he lost him, he thought he couldn't find him, so he went after him anyway. Does that now tell you that he was not after this kid in a malicious way?
Well, that's why it's a interesting point, Bob, because the question is when, who is the aggressor and at what point. He was told not to pursue him, and if you believe one version that we walked through last night, and I think is consistent with what George Zimmerman says, is he was returning to his car along a dark walkway, and we walked it last night, and that Trayvon Martin jumped out and confronted him. Now, that's what George Zimmerman says. Trayvon Martin's not here. He can't tell us what he says happened, but that's what he says, that he jumped him at that point. And is that the point of aggression? He said, he made some remark to him, and they got into a brawl at that point. Now, it sounds like, if you back up a little bit, that it's George Zimmerman who's pursuing him, who's suspicious of him, who's making phone calls. But it seems almost like, when he's headed back to his car, he's headed back to his car, according to George Zimmerman, that's when Trayvon, that's when he punches him in the face, confronts him and punches him in the face. Is that the point of aggression for the jury?
All right, Bob.
Just one fast follow-up. If I ask you that question, look at the wrong camera, do I have to repeat it? No, I'm only kidding. Go ahead.
That's what we stopped for, Bob.
No.
Go ahead, David. David has a question.
Greta, when you're inside the courtroom, do you get a sense that the people there and the jurors, do they have any idea how much media attention this case is getting?
I don't think so, except that they get the instruction every time they leave, not to talk to anybody, so they might get it. I'll tell you the thing that worries me. Look, I'm a big jury fan. I look up at that jury panel, and look, there's no question that there is a racial undertone to this. There were protests when this happened back in February of 2012. And, I got to tell you that I certainly wish I wish to try to sort of put the lid on whatever happens, that we had a mixed jury. We don't have a mixed jury. They're predominant. There maybe all be white. There may be a Hispanic woman who's among them, but it would certainly help down the road if we had a mixed jury, because that's the big fear here. It's like we all should be going into this thing that no matter what the jury decides, we respect what they say. They decided it, and not pick sides. Trials aren't about picking sides. Trials are about facts and what happened.
Hey, Greta, I got a question. You talked about how the jurors, they're not allowed to talk to anyone. Why is that now when we're watching it on TV? Isn't that kind of an irrelevant thing at this point? You should be able to talk about it with anybody, right?
No. No? Because we poison them, and we poison them. Absolutely not. I say, are you kidding? Do you want a juror talking to Greg Gutfeld? Let's go around the room around that table. I've seen that 5 table.
I would give them some tremendous insight. I've written a couple of titles.
I'm sure you would. Actually, I'm sure you would. I'm just not so sure that